Berlin, December 11th, 1941. Picture this moment. Adolf Hitler stands before the German parliament, his voice echoing through the chamber for 90 long minutes. He's angry, listing every complaint he has against Franklin Roosevelt, the American president. He calls Roosevelt a warmonger, someone controlled by outside forces, a man hell-bent on destroying Germany. The deputies sitting before him already sense what's coming at the end of this long, furious speech. Hitler is about to declare war on the United States of America. 6,000 miles away in Washington, Roosevelt sits in his study when the news arrives. He's been waiting for this moment, actually expecting it for 4 days now, ever since Japanese bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor. The question was never if Hitler would declare war, only when. Now, Roosevelt has his answer, and what he does next surprises almost everyone because he doesn't give a big speech. There's no powerful words about democracy standing strong, no dramatic promises about fighting evil wherever it hides. Instead, he sends Congress a short message that afternoon, barely 500 words long. He speaks for less than 6 minutes. You could fit the entire thing on just 2 pages. The long known and the long expected has thus taken place, Roosevelt tells Congress, his voice calm and steady, almost like he's discussing the weather. The forces trying to enslave the entire world are now moving toward our shores. That's his headline. That's all he says. The long known and the long expected. Not a battle cry. Not an emotional call to action, just a simple statement that what everyone knew was coming has finally arrived. Some people are shocked by how short it is. Remember, after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt had delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech, carefully chosen words that struck deep into every American heart. That speech had taken him hours to perfect, changing one date which will live in world history to the sharper, more memorable a date which will live in infamy. He had worked over every single word. This time, he doesn't bother with all that. His message to Congress on December 11th is straightforward, almost businesslike, like he's checking off items on a list. He mentions that Germany has been fighting an undeclared war against America for months already. He points out that Germany and Italy have now formally declared war. He asks Congress to recognize that a state of war exists between them. Then he stops talking. The House of Representatives votes 393-0 to declare war on Germany. The Senate votes 88-0. Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana, who had also voted against joining World War I decades earlier, doesn't even vote this time. She just sits there silently while her colleagues stand and approve the declaration. The whole process takes less than 1 hour. No debate, no long discussions, just a vote. And suddenly the United States is officially at war with Nazi Germany. But here's what makes Roosevelt's response so fascinating. It's not that he doesn't care about this historic moment. It's not that he can't find the right words. It's that he's been waiting for this exact moment for 2 solid years. And now that it's finally here, he doesn't need to convince anyone of anything anymore. Hitler has just solved Roosevelt's biggest political nightmare. Because for 27 months, ever since Germany invaded Poland back in September 1939, Roosevelt has been trying to figure out how to get America into the European war without actually saying out loud that he wants America in the European war. He's been walking a tightrope between his own deep belief that Hitler must be stopped and the American public's firm determination to stay out of Europe's mess. That tightrope has required some pretty creative moves. Back in September 1940, Roosevelt had traded 50 old destroyers to Britain in exchange for military base rights in British territories. It was clearly breaking neutrality rules, but he did it through executive order, completely bypassing Congress. When critics screamed about it, he just shrugged. Britain needed those ships. America needed those bases. Simple deal. In March 1941, he pushed through something called Lend-Lease. which allowed him to send unlimited weapons to Britain without Britain having to pay for them right away. "Suppose my neighbor's house catches fire," Roosevelt had explained to reporters, "and I have a garden hose 400 or 500 feet away. If he can take my hose and connect it to his water supply, I might help him put out that fire." The comparison sounded harmless and neighborly. The reality was that America had just become Britain's weapons factory, producing arms for a war America wasn't officially fighting. In August 1941, he met with Winston Churchill off the coast of Newfoundland and signed something called the Atlantic Charter, a joint statement about war goals for a war America wasn't technically part of. The charter talked about defeating Nazi tyranny, about making sure all people could choose their own governments, about creating lasting peace. It read like something two wartime allies would sign, not a neutral country and a country at war. By September, American destroyers were escorting British supply ships halfway across the Atlantic with orders to shoot German submarines the moment they saw them. Roosevelt called it patrolling. The Germans called it exactly what it was: an undeclared naval war. The destroyer Greer had traded fire with a German submarine on September 4th. The destroyer Kearney got torpedoed on October 17th, killing 11 American sailors. The destroyer Reuben James was sunk on October 31st, taking 115 men down into the cold Atlantic with it. American sailors were dying in the Atlantic Ocean, killed by German torpedoes, and America still wasn't officially at war with Germany. Roosevelt had wanted to ask Congress for a war declaration after the Reuben James went down. His cabinet talked him out of it. The votes weren't there in Congress. Too many Americans still believed Europe's war was Europe's problem to solve. Too many remembered World War I, remembered all the promises that it would make the world safe for democracy, remembered how none of that really worked out. So Roosevelt kept waiting and maneuvering and pushing the edges of neutrality until neutrality became just a legal fiction that everyone pretended to believe because nobody wanted to admit it was already over. Then Pearl Harbor happened. When the Japanese attacked on December 7th, Roosevelt's first reaction, after the shock and the anger wore off, might have been relief. Not relief about the attack itself, not about the 2,400 Americans killed at Pearl Harbor, but relief that the waiting was finally over, that the political paralysis was broken, that he could finally ask Congress for war and know the votes would actually be there. Except Pearl Harbor only solved half his problem. Japan had attacked America. That part was crystal clear. But Germany hadn't attacked anyone on December 7th. Germany was 6,000 miles away fighting Britain and the Soviet Union. Yes, Germany and Japan had signed something called the Tripartite Pact back in September 1940, promising to help each other if attacked by a new enemy. But Japan had attacked America, not the other way around. The pact didn't actually require Germany to do anything, which meant that after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt faced an awkward situation. America was now at war with Japan, the enemy he considered the smaller threat. But America wasn't at war with Germany, the power he saw as the real danger to the world. He'd spent 2 years trying to get America into the war against Hitler, and now he was stuck in a war against Japan's leader, Tojo, instead. He couldn't just ignore Japan and focus on Germany. The American people would never accept that. Pearl Harbor demanded a response in the Pacific Ocean, but he also couldn't let the war against Japan eat up all of America's resources while Hitler conquered Europe, and possibly even Britain. He needed a way to fight both wars at once. He needed Germany to give him a reason to declare war on them. And on December 11th, 1941, Adolf Hitler handed him exactly that reason on a silver platter. Hitler's speech to the German parliament that day is a strange piece of history. He spends the first hour talking about his own life story, his rise to power, his rebuilding of Germany from the ashes. He talks about Roosevelt like he's settling a personal grudge, someone who's insulted him one too many times. He calls him a puppet, a warmonger who's violated neutrality at every possible turn, a man who's been trying to bait Germany into war for years. On that last point, Hitler is completely right. I will pass over the insulting attacks made by this so-called president against me, Hitler tells the parliament. That he calls me a gangster is uninteresting. After all, this expression wasn't invented in Europe, but in America. No doubt because such gangsters don't exist here. The deputies laugh at his joke. Hitler warms up even more. He lists all of Roosevelt's provocations one by one. The destroyers for bases deal, Lend-Lease, the Atlantic Charter, the shoot-on-sight orders, the American takeover of Iceland. Each one, Hitler says, was an act of war in everything but name. Again, he's not wrong about the basic facts. He's just completely wrong about what to do about them. Because Hitler actually has choices here. He could do nothing at all. The Tripartite Pact doesn't force him to join Japan's war. Japan attacked America. Germany didn't. He could keep up the legal pretense that Germany and America aren't at war, even while American destroyers hunt his submarines in the Atlantic. That would be the smart move. It would keep Roosevelt trapped in his political mess, forced to fight Japan while trying to convince America to care about what's happening in Europe. It would buy Hitler precious time to finish off the Soviet Union before dealing with America. Hitler's own naval commander, Admiral Erich Raeder, has been begging him for months to declare war on America. Raeder wants to unleash the submarines, to let them hunt American cargo ships without any restrictions, to cut Britain's supply line right at its source. But Hitler has resisted up until now, knowing deep down that war with America would be a disaster Germany simply couldn't afford. Now, with Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, Raeder brings up his argument again. The Americans are going to declare war anyway, he insists. They're already fighting an undeclared war in the Atlantic right now. Declaring war officially would let Germany fight back without any restrictions. And Japan's surprise attack has given Germany the perfect moment to do it, when America is reeling and distracted and vulnerable. Hitler listens to Raeder's reasoning and decides he's right. On December 11th, after his long, angry speech attacking Roosevelt, Hitler announces that Germany considers itself at war with the United States. Italy follows Germany's lead the same day. The Tripartite Pact partners stand together, even though the pact didn't actually require it. It's arguably the worst strategic blunder Hitler makes in the entire war. And that's saying something, because Hitler has just done something Roosevelt couldn't do himself. Something Roosevelt had been desperately trying to accomplish for 2 solid years. He's united all of America's enemies into one clear fight. He's given Roosevelt permission to fight the exact war Roosevelt wanted to fight, in exactly the order Roosevelt wanted to fight it. He's ended all the debate about America First policies and isolationism, and whether Europe's problems should be America's problems. Most importantly, he's freed Roosevelt from having to choose between fighting in the Pacific or fighting in Europe. Now, Roosevelt can do exactly what his military advisors have been quietly recommending for months. Pursue what they call a Germany First strategy, throwing the bulk of American military power against Hitler while fighting a holding action against Japan. Think about the timing here. The Japanese have just destroyed a huge chunk of America's Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. They're advancing rapidly across Southeast Asia, conquering the Philippines, threatening Australia. By any normal logic, America should be focused entirely on the Pacific, on revenge, on stopping the Japanese advance before it gets worse. Instead, within just a few weeks, Roosevelt and Churchill will meet in Washington and confirm their strategy. Germany is the main priority. Japan can wait its turn. This dramatic shift is only possible because Hitler declared war first. If Hitler had stayed quiet, if he'd kept up the fiction of neutrality, Roosevelt would have faced enormous political pressure to focus everything on Japan. The American public wanted revenge for Pearl Harbor. Congress wanted immediate action in the Pacific. The Philippines were falling to Japanese forces. American territory was under direct attack. And the idea of sending most of American forces to Europe while all that was happening would have been politically impossible to sell. Hitler's declaration of war changes absolutely everything. It makes the war truly global in scope. It makes the war about something bigger than just Pearl Harbor. It lets Roosevelt tell the American people that they're fighting for the survival of democracy everywhere in the world, not just avenging one surprise attack. And Roosevelt understands this gift immediately, which is exactly why his message to Congress on December 11th is so incredibly brief. He doesn't need to convince anyone anymore. He doesn't need to carefully explain why America should fight Germany. Hitler has already done all that work for him. All Roosevelt needs to do is acknowledge the obvious reality and ask Congress to formalize what Hitler has already declared. The long-known and the long-expected has thus taken place. It's almost dismissive in its brevity. Of course Hitler declared war. Of course we're fighting Germany now. This was always going to happen eventually. Now it has, so let's get moving. Roosevelt's brevity is actually a brilliant power move when you think about it. A longer, more dramatic speech would suggest this is a bigger decision than it really is, that there's something to debate or carefully consider. The short message essentially says, this is simple and obvious. Hitler declared war. We accept his declaration. Moving on to the actual work. In his brief message, Roosevelt does include one paragraph that hints at his sense of relief. Never before has there been a greater challenge to life, liberty, and civilization, he tells Congress. Delay invites great danger. Rapid and united effort by all of the peoples of the world who are determined to remain free will ensure a world victory of the forces of justice and righteousness over the forces of savagery and barbarism. Rapid and united effort. Those are the key words buried in there. Not just American effort alone, united effort. All the peoples of the world who are determined to remain free. Roosevelt has been desperately trying to unite that effort for 2 long years. Finally, it's actually possible. The vote in Congress perfectly reflects this dramatic shift. When Roosevelt had asked for war against Japan 4 days earlier, the vote had been 538 to 1, with Jeannette Rankin casting the single dissenting vote. It was overwhelming support, but there had been that one voice of dissent. That one person willing to stand up and say no. The vote on Germany is 481 to 0, with Rankin choosing not to vote at all. Not even a single voice of dissent this time around. The case is simply too clear, too obvious. Germany declared war on America. America accepts. Simple as that. What's truly remarkable is how little public debate there is about any of this. After Pearl Harbor, there had been shockwaves, anger, loud calls for revenge across the country. Newspapers had run massive headlines about the day of infamy. Radio broadcasters had spent endless hours discussing what it all meant, what America should do next. After Hitler's declaration on December 11th, the public reaction is noticeably more muted, almost calm. Of course Hitler declared war. Of course we're fighting Germany now too. This is exactly what everyone expected would happen. The New York Times runs the story on the front page, naturally, but the headline is almost bureaucratic in its plain language. Congress votes war on Italy and Germany. Roosevelt sees force of savagery, unleashed on world. Not something dramatic, like America enters, European war, or Hitler's fatal mistake, or any of the sensational framings that might have appeared in other circumstances. Just a straightforward statement of facts. Congress voted. War exists now. Moving on to what comes next. This muted reaction is partly because Pearl Harbor is still completely dominating all the news coverage. The attack was only 4 days ago. People are still processing it, still learning the full extent of the damage, still hearing new stories of heroism and terrible loss. Germany's declaration feels almost like a footnote to the much bigger Pearl Harbor story. But it's also because, at some deep level, most Americans understand that this was always where things were heading anyway. The undeclared war in the Atlantic, the Lend-Lease supplies flowing to Britain, the Atlantic Charter, the shoot-on-sight orders, all of it had been steadily building toward this exact moment. Hitler's official declaration just makes everything formal and out in the open. Roosevelt's closest advisors fully understand the incredible gift Hitler has just handed them. Secretary of War Henry Stimson writes in his personal diary that Hitler's declaration brings great relief because it completely solves the thorny problem of how to prioritize fighting 2 wars at once. Now there's absolutely no question about it. Germany comes first, then Japan gets dealt with. Churchill understands the significance too. He's actually in Washington when the news arrives, having rushed across the dangerous Atlantic right after Pearl Harbor to coordinate strategy with Roosevelt face to face. When he hears that Hitler has declared war on America, he's absolutely delighted. So we had won after all, he'll write later in his memoirs. America's entry into the war had made final victory inevitable. But America's entry into the European war specifically, that was what truly mattered to Britain's survival. The next evening, December 12th, Churchill addresses a joint session of the American Congress. His speech is everything Roosevelt's wasn't. Long, eloquent, stirring, full of powerful imagery. He talks about the shared heritage linking Britain and America together, about the noble fight for freedom, about the long, difficult road that lies ahead. 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been easy, without shedding a single drop of blood, for the United States and Great Britain to have insisted on fulfillment of the disarmament terms of the treaties which Germany signed after the Great War. Churchill tells Congress with his distinctive voice, but that chance has passed. It is gone forever. Prodigious hammer strokes have been needed to bring us together again. Prodigious hammer strokes. Pearl Harbor, Hitler's declaration, the massive hammer strokes that Roosevelt couldn't deliver himself, that he'd been carefully maneuvering toward for 2 long years, that had finally fallen with crushing force. Churchill receives multiple standing ovations. His speech gets reprinted in newspapers all across the country. It's exactly the kind of grand oratory people expect at historic moments like this. The kind of speech that will be remembered and quoted for generations. Roosevelt's brief message to Congress the day before is already starting to fade from memory. But Roosevelt doesn't mind being forgotten. He's not trying to make history with beautiful words right now. He's trying to win an actual war against real enemies. And Hitler has just made that enormous job dramatically easier. Within just days, American and British military leaders are gathering in Washington to plan out the entire war effort. The conference, given the code name Arcadia, runs from December 22nd all the way through January 14th. The critical decisions made during those intense weeks will shape the entire Allied war effort for years to come. Germany first. That's the fundamental strategic choice that gets locked in. The bulk of American military power will flow to Europe, to North Africa, to the Atlantic Ocean. Japan will be contained and held at bay, but not actually defeated until after Germany falls completely. It's the exact strategy Roosevelt and his closest advisors have wanted all along. It's the strategy that makes perfect sense given Germany's much greater industrial power, its control of most of Europe, its direct threat to Britain and the Soviet Union. But it's only politically possible, only something Roosevelt can actually do, because Hitler declared war first. If America had been the one to declare war on Germany, if Roosevelt had gone to Congress and asked them to prioritize Europe over the Pacific, while Pearl Harbor's wreckage was still literally burning in the harbor, the political backlash would have been absolutely intense and possibly destructive. Isolationists would have loudly accused him of cynically using Pearl Harbor as a convenient excuse to fight the war he'd secretly always wanted. The outraged public would have demanded total focus on Japan, on the enemy that had actually attacked American territory without warning. Hitler's declaration completely eliminates all of those political problems. Germany attacked America first. America is simply responding to that attack. The order of priorities becomes a straightforward military decision now, not a divisive political battle. Roosevelt never says any of this out loud publicly. He never points out how incredibly convenient Hitler's impulsive decision was, how it magically solved his biggest political problem, how it gave him exactly the war he wanted in exactly the form he wanted it. He just quietly accepts the gift and gets straight to work. By late December, American troops are already boarding ships heading for Europe. Not for the Pacific, where the Japanese are still advancing and winning, but for Europe, where the long war against Germany is just beginning. The first major American military operation in the war won't be some dramatic island assault in the Pacific. It won't be a massive naval battle to avenge Pearl Harbor. It will be Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942, aimed squarely at defeating German forces and opening up the path into Europe itself. All of this flows directly from Hitler's single decision on December 11th. And Hitler, for his part, seems to have absolutely no regrets about what he's done. In his long speech to the German parliament, he'd portrayed the declaration as a moment of strength, of Germany boldly taking control of events, rather than passively waiting for Roosevelt to make the first move. He'd completely convinced himself that war with America was inevitable anyway, that declaring it openly and honestly was better than continuing to fight an undeclared war with frustrating restrictions. His naval commanders are absolutely thrilled by the decision. Finally, they can unleash their submarine fleet without any restrictions holding them back. Finally, they can hunt American merchant ships all along the vulnerable East Coast, where targets are incredibly plentiful and defenses are still weak and unprepared. And for a few brief months, the German submarines do have spectacular success. In the first half of 1942, they sink hundreds of American merchant ships within plain sight of the American coastline. Civilians actually watch from beaches as oil tankers burn on the horizon like funeral pyres. It's the closest the war physically comes to American shores. But the success doesn't last nearly as long as the Germans hope. America adapts quickly, implements convoy systems, builds replacement ships faster than they can be sunk, develops much better anti-submarine tactics and technology. By the end of 1942, the crucial Battle of the Atlantic is steadily turning against Germany. And meanwhile, American industrial power is ramping up to levels the world has never seen before. Factories that had been peacefully producing family cars are now churning out battle tanks. Shipyards are launching new military vessels every single week. Aircraft plants are turning out heavy bombers by the thousands. All of that enormous power is being aimed directly at Germany, because Germany declared war on America, because Hitler made it politically possible for Roosevelt to prioritize the European theater without paying any political cost. Roosevelt never gives a grand, memorable speech about any of this dramatic shift. He doesn't need to. His brief message on December 11th said absolutely everything that needed saying. The long-known and the long-expected has thus taken place. Hitler has declared war. America accepts his declaration. Now comes the hard work of actually winning. And in those few matter-of-fact words, Roosevelt quietly acknowledged what he'd been patiently waiting 2 long years to finally say out loud. The war he'd been carefully preparing for, subtly maneuvering toward, steadily building toward, had finally begun. Not the way he'd originally expected it to start. Not through a bold American declaration of war, but through an enemy's unexpected gift. handed to him wrapped in Hitler's anger and miscalculation. Hitler had solved Roosevelt's problem. Roosevelt didn't need to explain that to Congress or to the American public. He just needed to calmly accept it and immediately move forward. So he spoke for 6 short minutes, formally asked for a declaration of war, and got straight back to work on winning. The long known and the long expected. Sometimes the most important and powerful words are the ones that simply acknowledge what everyone already knows deep down. Hitler was always going to be America's enemy eventually. America was always going to have to fight Germany at some point. The only real political problem was figuring out how to make that unavoidable reality actually happen. On December 11th, 1941, Adolf Hitler solved that problem himself, completely by his own choice. And Roosevelt's response was to essentially say, yes, obviously, we all knew this was coming, let's go win this war. No unnecessary drama, no grand rhetoric for the history books. Just calm acceptance of a reality that had been building and building for years and had finally arrived in full force. That was what Franklin Roosevelt said when Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. Not much at all, because he didn't need to say much. Hitler had already said it all for him.